Happy International Women's Day. Today isn't just about celebrating women. It's about waking up. It's about breaking the cycle of shrinking, settling, and making yourself small just to be accepted. Because for too long, women have been told to dim their light, lower their voices, and ask for less. But not today. Not anymore. Let me ask you something. How many times have you been told you're too much? Too emotional? Too ambitious? Too sensitive? Too independent? Maybe they told you to be softer, quieter, easier to handle. Maybe they made you feel like your voice was too loud, your dreams were too big, your love was too intense. So you tried to shrink yourself. You toned it down. You compromised. You settled. And still, it was never enough. But today, that ends. Because let me tell you something that will change everything. You were never too much. They just wanted you to settle for less. They wanted you to lower your expectations so they wouldn't have to raise their effort. They wanted you to be satisfied with the bare minimum because giving more was never their plan. They wanted you to question your worth because the moment you knew it, you'd stop accepting their excuses. And guess what? They were right to be scared. Because today, you stop apologizing for expecting more. You stop making yourself small so others can feel big. You stop believing the lie that you need to be less in order to be loved. And here on Girlify Mind, we don't wait for permission to be powerful. We own it. We speak the truth. And we make damn sure that no woman watching this ever doubts her worth again. So today we're talking about the biggest lie they made you believe, that you were too much. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were just asking the wrong people. Let's get into it. 1. They saw your worth. They just hoped you didn't. Have you ever noticed how the same people who told you to lower your expectations had no problem meeting them for someone else? The guy who told you he wasn't ready for a relationship? He proposed to someone else 6 months later. The friend who was always too busy for you? She had time for everyone but you. So let's be real. They saw your worth. They just hoped you wouldn't. Because the moment you realized what you deserved, you became a problem. You stopped accepting breadcrumbs. You started demanding more. You started calling them out. And instead of stepping up, they made you feel like the problem. You're asking for too much. You need to relax. You should be grateful for what you have. No. They just wanted you to settle for what was easy for them to give. And the moment you stop accepting less, that's when everything changes. You think you lost them? No. They lost you. And the worst part? They knew exactly what they were doing. 2. Your standards were never the problem. They told you that you were difficult, that your expectations were unrealistic, that love meant compromise. So you started questioning yourself. Maybe they were right. Maybe you were being too harsh. Maybe you were setting the bar too high. Maybe love was supposed to be about patience, about waiting, about proving yourself. But let me ask you something. If your standards were the problem, why did you only feel this way around people who couldn't meet them? Because here's the truth, your standards were never the issue. Their inability to meet them was. They didn't want to rise to your level, so they convinced you that you needed to lower yourself to theirs. They wanted effort to feel like a privilege, not a basic requirement. So they guilt-tripped you. They made you feel demanding for expecting consistency. They made you feel needy for wanting attention. They made you feel controlling for setting boundaries. But listen to me, your standards were never too high. You were just surrounded by people who wanted to do the bare minimum and still be rewarded. Because the right person won't make you feel guilty for wanting respect. Won't call you clingy for expecting effort. Won't make you feel like your love is a burden. So stop believing that you need to settle. Stop letting people convince you that your expectations are too much when they are literally the bare minimum. And remember this, the only people who will ever fear a woman with standards are the ones who can't meet them. 3. You don't need to shrink to be loved. How many times have you made yourself smaller just to be accepted? You laughed softer. You spoke less. You stopped asking for too much. You made yourself easier to handle because somewhere along the way, you learned that being too much scared people away. So you started holding yourself back. You didn't wear what you wanted because you didn't want to attract the wrong attention. You didn't say what you felt because you didn't want to upset anyone. You didn't ask for more because you didn't want to seem ungrateful. But let me ask you something. Why should you dim your light just so others don't feel small around you? Because here's what no one told you. The right people won't be intimidated by your strength. They'll be inspired by it. And the ones who couldn't handle you, they were never meant to stand beside you. A love that makes you feel like you have to shrink is not love, it's control. A relationship that only works when you're bending over backward is not a relationship. It's an uneven transaction. And yet, they had you believing that the problem was you. That if you could just be quieter, calmer, less yourself, things would work out. But tell me this, if someone only loves you when you're a lesser version of yourself, do they really love you? Or do they just love that they can control you? The right people won't require you to be less. The right love won't require you to sacrifice your identity. The right man won't need you to shrink so he can feel big. So from today, stop making yourself smaller. Stop walking on eggshells. Stop silencing your needs just to be tolerated. You were never too much. They just weren't enough. 4. Stop lowering your standards to keep people who wouldn't raise theirs. How many times have you bent over backward for someone who wouldn't even meet you halfway? You adjusted your life for them. You made time for them. You ignored the red flags, gave second chances, and convinced yourself that if you just held on a little longer, things would change. But they never did. Because the truth is, the people who make you lower your standards were never planning to meet you at your level. They knew you had a good heart. They knew you would stay. They knew they could give you less and still have you there, hoping for more. So, they took your patience for granted. They knew you'd be the one to text first. They knew you'd forgive them no matter how badly they treated you. They knew you'd keep waiting, even when they stopped showing up. And the worst part? They never had to change because you were the one always adjusting. But let me tell you something that will change everything. The people who truly value you won't make you lower your standards just to keep them around. The right man won't make you question your worth. The right friends won't make you feel like you're hard to love. The right people won't treat your presence like an afterthought. And the second you stop bending, shrinking, adjusting for people who don't deserve you, everything changes. Because when you finally decide you're done settling, you stop attracting people who need you too. 5. The woman who stops settling becomes unstoppable. The second you decide you're done settling, you become dangerous. Because now they can't manipulate you. Now they can't feed you lies. Now they can't guilt trip you into staying where you don't belong. And suddenly, they're the ones feeling small. For so long, they kept you in a cycle. They gave you just enough to keep you hoping. They knew exactly how little effort they could put in while still making you stay. They knew if they disappeared, you'd reach out first. They knew if they said the right words, you'd forgive them again. They knew if they gave you crumbs, you'd convince yourself it was enough. But what happens when you wake up? When you stop settling? When you stop waiting? When you stop making excuses for people who don't deserve to stand next to you? You become a woman they can't control. And that scares them. Because now, You no longer respond to bare minimum effort. You no longer let sorry be a free pass for disrespect. You no longer see your standards as a problem, but as protection. The moment you stop accepting less, the game changes. Now, the same people who once had you questioning your worth are the ones questioning their own. The same ones who kept you waiting are the ones wondering why you don't care anymore. And the best part? By the time they realize what they lost, you're already gone. And that's when you finally see it, the power you've had all along. Because when a woman stops settling, she doesn't just move on. She levels up. 6. The people who made you feel like you were too much were never enough. Let that sink in. The people who made you feel like you had to change, like you had to be smaller, quieter, more chill, like your emotions, your opinions, your expectations were too much, they were never enough for you. And they knew it. That's why they convinced you that you were the problem. Because if you ever realized your own worth, you would leave. And they couldn't have that. So instead, they made you believe that you needed to be less emotional because they weren't capable of handling emotions. You needed to be less demanding because they weren't willing to put in effort. You needed to lower your standards because they had no plans of rising to meet them. They didn't want to lose you, but they didn't want to treat you right either. So they kept you stuck, confused, questioning, and doubting yourself. And you let them. Because you thought that maybe, if you just loved them harder, proved your worth, waited long enough, they would see your value. But they already saw it. And instead of stepping up, they chose to make you feel like you had to step down. But now, you see the truth. You were never too much. You were never asking for too much. You were simply asking for the wrong people to love you the way you deserve. And when you stop asking, you make space for the ones who don't need to be convinced. The ones who meet your standards without excuses. The ones who respect you without conditions. The ones who don't make you feel like you need to be less to be loved. And that's when you realize you never lost anyone worth keeping. They lost you. And now, they don't get to come back. Because the woman who finally knows her worth never looks back. Conclusion: you were never too much. They just weren't enough. Let's get one thing straight. You were never too much. You were just too much for people who were never enough for you. For too long, you were made to believe that you had to shrink yourself, your voice, your dreams, your expectations, just to be loved, just to be accepted. Just to keep the peace. But let me ask you this. Where did that ever get you? Did it make them treat you better? Did it make them stay? Did it make them love you the way you deserved? Or did it leave you feeling exhausted, unseen, and constantly questioning whether you were the problem? Because here's the truth. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. The ones who didn't want to give. The ones who weren't capable of loving deeply. The ones who wanted you to lower yourself because they had no plans of rising. And now that you finally see it, you're done settling. You're done making yourself smaller just to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You're done waiting for effort from people who were never planning to give it. You're done explaining why you deserve more to people who were always okay with giving you less. Because when you finally stop settling, do you know what happens? The people who once made you feel like you were asking for too much, they realize they lost something rare. The ones who breadcrumbed you with half-hearted love, they see you choosing yourself instead of waiting for them to change. The ones who never met your standards, they finally understand what they let go. And by the time they realize, it's too late. Because you've moved on. You've stopped chasing, explaining, waiting. You've stopped apologizing for your emotions, your depth, your expectations. And instead, you've started living. Loving yourself the way you once begged others to love you. Respecting yourself the way you once wished they had. Choosing yourself every single time. Because here's what no one tells you. The day you stop settling is the day your whole life changes. You don't just attract better relationships. You attract a better version of yourself. You don't just find love. You find peace. You don't just walk away. You level up. And the best part? You never look back. So today, make a promise. No more shrinking. No more waiting. No more believing that you need to be less to be loved. You were never too much. You were always enough. And the moment you realize that, you stop accepting anything less. Drop an "I choose me" in the comments if you're done settling. Let's start a movement.